Conscious leaders put people first, but so do conscious companies. I spent 7 years of my life working at Skyrun Aspen, always joking that it was my public service subsidy. And they walk this. During COVID, Skyrun helped short-term rentals transition to long-term housing so locals had a place to stay and owners could keep their homes. And when the time was right, they helped us shift right back as a community. If you're looking for a vacation rental company that leads with care, then Skyrun is it. To experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay. Whether for yourself or someone in your community, check the link in the show notes for more.
Hello, my name is Skippy Mesereau, coach, former elected official, and lifetime public servant. Welcome to Healing Our Politics, the show that shows you, the heart-centered public servant and political leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It is my job to sit down or stand up with the best experts in all areas of human development, thought leaders, coaches, therapists, authors, scientists, and more, to take the best of what they have learned and translate it specifically for the public service experience, providing you actionable, practical, tactical tools that you can test out today in your life and with your teams. I will also talk to leaders across the globe with a self-care practice, getting to know them at a deeply human and personal level so that you can learn from their challenges and journey. Warning, this is a post-partisan space. Yes, I have a bias. You have a bias. We all have a bias. Everybody gets a bias. And I will be stripping out all of the unconscious cues of bias from this space. No politics, partisanship, or policy here. Because well-being belongs to all of us. And we will all be better served if every human in leadership, regardless of party, ideology, race, or geography, are happier, healthier, and more connected. This show is about resourcing you, the human doing leadership, and trusting you to make up your own damn mind about what to do with it and what's best for your community. So, as always, with love, here we go. Welcome to the Healing Our Politics podcast, the show that shows you, the heart-centered leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. In today's episode, I sit down with expert in criminal rehabilitation, or as he would call it, transformation, Eldra Jackson III. Eldra is the co-executive director of Inside Circle, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending cycles of violence and incarceration through healing-centered inner work, primarily with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men. This is a story of recovery and transformation that Eldra knows intimately, because while I met him on the stage at the INC conference as perhaps the most heart-led, wise, and connected member of a room filled with powerful change makers, before that time, Eldra himself spent 24 years in prison for robbery and attempted murder, including years in solitary confinement where, after realizing the state of California deemed him more dangerous than Charles Manson, a co-inmate of his, he began his journey of personal inquiry and transformation through the very circle work he now facilitates. Since his release, Eldra has become a national voice in trauma-informed care, restorative justice, and men's emotional wellness. He's a sought-after speaker, TED presenter, and subject of The Work, a South by Southwest award-winning documentary that takes you inside the group therapy circles at New Folsom Prison, offering a raw and unfiltered look at accountability, brotherhood, and emotional excavation. He has been featured by NBC News, Forbes, the LA Times, the Esalen Institute, and Aspen Institute, and is the host of the well-renowned Inside Circle podcast, where I had the good fortune to be a guest of his earlier this year. In this episode, we talk about adverse childhood events, ACEs, which for Eldra looked like years of molestation, and how trauma early in life, when untreated or moderated by pro-social influences, often leads to lives of apathy, crime, deprivation and pain, and what we can do to stop and reverse that reality. We discuss the psychology of gang culture, respect, power, fear, and pain, and the mindset that he held as a gang member when committing acts of crime. We discuss intervention points, the nature of prison. Should it be punitive, rehabilitative, or transformational? What most political leaders get wrong about our psychology and creating a better society. We discuss what he would do to reduce prison populations and crime by 80% tomorrow. We talk about his transformation and the daily practices and mindsets that keep him anchored and in service today. We break down what a circle is, how it works, and how to run one. We discuss the nature of evil, toxic masculinity, and the resistance to that term, and ultimately break down the toolkit that you can embrace as an individual and a leader to do your part to cultivate the good society today. So, I hope you enjoy this raw, surprising, but ultimately hopeful conversation with Eldra Jackson III. What does love mean to you, and how do you experience it in your life?
Love to me at this stage in my life means a willingness to be open, to be vulnerable, and to be hurt. Because for me, in order to allow love in, I have to make a choice to open up those places that, I'm so habituated to protect. So for me, love opens those places and means that I'm willing to be hurt.
And why is that important?
Because for me, it's important because it means I'm feeling. If I'm not doing that, I'm not feeling. And so I'm open to the full range of not just my emotions, but the human experience.
I grew up in an environment where not feeling was the goal. It wasn't necessarily handed down, here's what you must do, but that's what I learned as a little one. There's one acceptable emotion, and that was, for me, happiness. Anything else was not acceptable to display. Where along the line have you learned that feeling is important or has merit?
It started when I was in my mid 30s is when I learned that feeling was important, because up to that point, as far back as a real young child, feeling was not an option. And with living from a place where feeling wasn't an option, a lot of people got hurt. I hurt a lot of people, and I hurt myself because I was shut off from that part of myself. I closed that capacity down.
Tell me about that. What caused you to agree with the belief that you were not allowed to feel?
Well, there was a combination of things, being a child raised in the 70s and 80s, it was a very different time, number one. So the cultural norms and messages were that boys acted in a particular way, showed up in a particular way, and feelings, emotional literacy was not something that was common.
Yeah.
Having little boys be in touch with feelings and emotions, that was, boys didn't cry. Big boys don't cry. Shut up. Rub some dirt on it, all of that jazz. And those were the cultural norms. That was what was going on in society. Those were the messages. Little boys are made of snips and snails and puppy dog tails, and little girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice. So there's messaging in all of that point to and dictate that having feelings and having emotions was for a certain set of people, and having a stiff upper lip and being aggressive and being able to troop through anything was for another set of human beings. That is the cultural piece, the big piece. And then as an individual, I was a child that experienced child molestation at a very early age. And my younger sister, 4 years younger than me, during one of those incidents was used as a bargaining chip by the perpetrator. When I refused, The response was, okay, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. We'll go in the room and, see what's happening with your little sister. And again, the messaging of that time, when my dad's not there, I'm the man of the house, I'm responsible. You take care of your mother, take care of your sister, all of those sorts of things. And so it was my duty and responsibility to take care of my sister. And being a kid, 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, throughout all of the years when those episodes were occurring, that child determined that because I loved my sister, because I cared about my sister, that was something that made me vulnerable. That was something that put me in the line of fire. That was something that put me in jeopardy. So caring and loving and all of those sorts of things are bad. Those are not things I will be doing moving forward. That's what that little kid, that was the lens that he saw the world and began to craft who he would be moving forward.
So this was a babysitter or a set of babysitters in the home in your house?
Yes.
And this is over years.
It happened in my house, and these were, babysitters. These were people who were coming into the house, who were invited into the house while my parents were gone.
Did anyone else other than you and your sister know about it?
No, my parents didn't know about this until I was sitting in a prison visiting room talking to my dad about it, like I said, in my mid-30s.
Wow. And so there was one, it was a male, a boy who was older than you and effectively gave you the choice of it was either you or your sister?
In that particular episode, yes, it was the male, but it was a brother-sister combo. So there were episodes with the older sister. They were both high schoolers. So oftentimes, more often than not, it was the female.
Wow.
And a couple of times, the brother would come over and they would, tag team babysitting. This particular episode that I'm speaking about was with the brother, and my younger sister was in the bedroom with his sister.
Wow. And was your sister violated at any point? And again, it's her story to tell, so I don't have an expectation. But
To my knowledge, she was not. She's never shared anything like that with me.
wow.
And we share a lot.
Yeah. So literally from day one, you're given this choice and then you bear this burden for years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Who was the first person that you ever shared that out loud with? Was it your mom in prison?
The first person I ever shared that out loud with, it was in circle, sitting in prison.
Wow.
It was with a group of men sitting in a chapel, sitting in what we refer to, now as healing circles. At the time, it was simply known as men's group. That was the first time I ever spoke about it. Again, I think at that time I was 34 years old.
Do you recall if there was even a conscious story? Because a lot of times we disassociate and suppress to the point of not even consciously thinking about it. But insofar as that there was a conscious rationale or thought process, what kept you from sharing it for 28 to, 25 years?
For me, it goes back to the culture of the times. There is the open, big culture, and then there is the culture of a people. And, the culture at that time, as I remember it, is, what happens in the house stays in the house. And that's an overarching thing. But, in Black culture, for certain, that's a thing. Having issues and, engaging in sadness and needing some sort of mental or emotional support or something like that, that's for white folks. Black folks ain't got time for that. That the white people have the option and the freedom and the latitude to quote unquote be crazy and go sit on a couch and talk to somebody. They have money for that. They have the leisure time for that. Black people, we ain't got time for that. We got work to do. We got too many things to do. Suck it up and move on.
Yeah, so there's like a story, even if it's not consciously how you're thinking about it. Not only am I currently being hurt, my sister's at risk of being hurt, but if I were to say anything out loud, I could bring shame or retribution on my family and hurt my whole family. So I'm actually protecting the entire unit. That's a lot for an 8-year-old.
That is a lot, and there is, you use the protection piece. There's an element of that. But, again, for me in that time frame as a kid, it was really about the keeping of secrets and being indoctrinated into an environment where secrecy is a thing. Again, we're talking about the 70s and, early 80s and latchkey kids and coming home and being home by yourself, both parents working. Don't open the door for strangers. If the phone rings, yeah, answer it, but don't tell them your mama's not here. Say they're in the room sleeping or in the shower or something like. So there's this whole indoctrination into secrecy and not telling the truth and not exposing things. And so all of those things, for me, in my experience, go into communicating silence.
Yeah.
Communicating secrecy, communicating, holding things in, communicating to not communicate.
Yeah. There's just so much complexity going on here. I mean, there's what's happening in the abuse and your story around that and your role in the unit. Then there's the fitting into the broader American society and then the subculture within that society, which can have conflicting, although interesting. I just had such an incredible conversation with Brian Hubbard on the podcast. And it's interesting because I hear so many echoes of what you're talking about in a very different place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you would agree with this, but my understanding as a coach, professional, as a human who's been on my own journey is, belonging is really the central drive of all humans, whether we realize it or not. We're the most social species on the planet, and isolation or banishment or exile is often our greatest unnamed fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a little one who literally requires other humans for survival, for food, for shelter, all of us adapt to a strategy
Mm-hmm.
to survive, to have those things in our own lives. And what I hear you saying is, you're taking in all of those social cues, and I have to learn to manipulate the truth, to subjugate my own feelings in order to be accepted into that group, e.g. for survival. Is that how you would understand it, or would you think of it differently?
I would agree that a basic human want and drive is to be a part of something. And yes, those were, a lot of the messages. That was a lot of the messaging, because as we sit here and talk about it right now, and I go back to those times, there was so much going on, during those times. Again, I'm dating myself. We're talking about the Cold War, the political climate, the economic climate, the world climate was very different. And I was, what they referred to as a military brat. My dad was a vet. He was in the military. And so, these times that we're talking about, I'm talking about overseas in Germany and being immersed in that whole culture, immersed in the always at the ready. And, we're right here on the brink of war. The Berlin Wall existed during that time. And, literally tanks in the street and having, preparations in school for, a bombing fallout and all that, not fire drills, but bombing drills and all of those. So there was a lot of shit going on.
And I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because I think we very frequently across human history fall into the belief that our time is the worst time. And it's so important to step back and realize, actually, it wasn't so great before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question that may go nowhere. I just heard you say it once in some prep materials, and I don't know if there's a backstory, but if there is, who was Vegas?
Oh, that was my primary alter ego. Vegas was a persona, a mask, a protector that I adopted when I embraced a street culture, when I embraced a subculture of criminal lifestyle and gangs and everything that, rolls with that. So from the time I was maybe 13, 14 until, again, into my mid 30s, that's who I was.
Do you remember when you named him or invented him?
Yeah, the name came about. There was a set of apartments in Sacramento, California, in the southern part of the city. It's known as the South Side. It's known as Meadowview. And these apartments at the time were known as Danger Island. That's where I used to, started really getting immersed in street culture and running around and was like, okay, yeah, this is my new vocation. This is my career, gangster / criminal. And the persona that was gifted me, the name that, was gifted to that individual was a Vegas. At the time, Little Vegas.
If I had never met Eldra Jackson III on a stage at the INC conference, a man who instantly caught my heart first and then the attention of my mind, who was precise with his words, who was loving in his affect, who oozed wisdom. If I had never met that man and I jumped in a little time machine and I was walking around Sacramento in, let's just say 1992, but you pick the year that works for you, and I ran into Vegas on the street, who's the man I meet? How does he act? How do I feel? What's the impact that I would experience, a la that first stage meeting, but from that version of you?
From that time period, that persona, you meet someone who, and I'm assuming that you are the Skippy that is before me today.
I wouldn't have the headphones on, but other than that, let's go with it.
Then you would, if you had good sense, you would probably be afraid, because Vegas would have meant you ill will on all levels, and he was a very violent person for zero reason at all. And I probably would have been sizing you up to figure out how to take something from you, from as little as what's in your pocket to your life.
I would question that there's no reason at all. As Skippy, there would be no reason. Where the fuck did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine now, retrospectively, you understand what that reason was for you. Do you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And the reason for me at that time, as the person who understands that person and that persona at that time, the reason is driven by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the motivation is to build on the persona so that other people know who Vegas is and they fear that persona. Because if you fear the persona that I am presenting, you will probably be blinded and your vision will be clouded and you will not see and understand how afraid I am.
Yeah. This is going to sound super weird, but I just got off of a bike ride and I had some music going, and amongst the songs that played was a DMX song. And I love DMX as an artist. Tragic story in so many ways. There's a documentary out there. I can't remember the name of it, but if anyone hasn't seen it, it's worth a watch. But when I think back to my younger self, who was deeply insecure and afraid, didn't know that. That wasn't my story in my head, but looking back, I know that. I remember how much I loved that music. And I realized it's because my insecurity was connecting with the insecurity of the artist, being pushed through that mirror of toughness, something that I didn't get to go do. So I got to kind of live that toughness through the music. And then a handful of years ago, right after like a deep self-development container where I was just cracked wide open, I was coming back and he had just passed away. And so I threw on some music, thinking like, I'm going to listen to this music and honor the artist. And in that state of being so open and just coming out of that space, I couldn't even listen to it because all I could hear was fear and sadness.
Yeah. Yeah. Fear and sadness. I spoke earlier about being shut off from emotions and not feeling, and fear at the very least was something that I have been in contact with most, if not all of my life. I just didn't have the wherewithal to be able to articulate that to myself or to others. But most of my motivation, if not all, was based in fear.
So this is an intentionally vague question.
Mm-hmm.
What is gang culture? Like, where does it come from? How does it manifest? How do you understand it today after having done so much work with yourself and others?
To give a generic and understandable insight to it, it's exactly what you mentioned earlier. It's a desire to belong. It's a desire to belong to something, and it's a desire to want to be safe, and it is a desire to want to be seen and accepted.
Yeah. And I could hear somebody who has no experience of gang culture directly, who lives in another state, doesn't travel in the inner city, going, you want to be safe by being in gang culture? Isn't that the most dangerous place you could be? How would you respond to that?
Well, from the outside looking in, yes, that what you just said makes absolute sense. But for folks who live in those environments, finding a group of people who think the way that you think, who believe in the things that you believe in, and who are committed to having your back and you have their back against folks who may be on the next block over or 4 blocks over or in the next city over, how is that any different from having borders that we call the United States? If you're coming from Canada, you have to pass through security. If you're coming from Mexico, you have to pass through security. If you're coming from France, you got to go through customs to make certain that you're supposed to be here and you're safe to be here.
Yeah.
There's no real difference ideologically. Now, what it looks like and how it plays out a little bit different. But, again, somebody from the world of gang culture can argue, well, damn, they over there shooting at each other in Pakistan and India.
Yep.
How is that not gang banging?
Yep.
They over there getting at each other in Russia and Ukraine. How is that not gang banging? They over there getting at each other in Palestine and Israel. How is that not gang banging?
Yeah. And in some ways, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, like how do I say this? The presentation of gang violence in these very minuscule micro pockets, rather than what you're talking about, which is sort of the macro expression on a geopolitical scale, is a confluence of the psychology of young male fear and dislocation meets an absence of trusted law enforcement and social service in a tightly packed environment. You're already in a city. There's only so much you can control without tanks or larger weapons. And so the size of the unit is just naturally smaller as a result of the geography and the systems of support or lack of support around you.
Mm-hmm. It's the again, the ideology of when you ask about or we talk about the gang culture or the gang mentality, we could talk about this all day. There are so many different ways you can break it down. Most people, when they think about gangs or when we talk about gangs, we're thinking about inner cities and we're thinking about folks that are identified as impoverished or on the wrong side of the tracks or disadvantaged, all of these different words that categorize people. And you have folks that move into communities that have gates around them.
Mm-hmm.
And they have homeowners associations and they have bylaws and they have rules and they have regulations and all of these stipulations that everybody is going to abide by. And if you don't abide by these, there are consequences.
Yeah.
There are levels of discipline. And gangs are structured in that way. And these are folks who have segregated and secluded themselves away from everyone else because they all believe the same thing. They all want to be a part of the same community, and they don't want any outsiders invading their space so that they feel safe. And anytime they see anybody make it through those gates who looks like they don't belong, there's going to be a confrontation.
Yeah.
So, in all levels of society, I can see where, and I'm certain psychologists and years from now, anthropologists will be able to break down the mentality of gangs, which is really about segregation and separation and building community. And all humans across the planet and across time have done that.
Yeah. What is the worst in your mind, worst or most harmful action that you have ever engaged in?
Oh, there's so much. I would say the most harmful action that I have ever engaged in is willingly adopting apathy as a way of being. And I say that because, any action that I could mention is born from apathy. Because I have to be willing in order to do, things to other human beings in order to be able to harm another human being, to be vicious and cruel to another soul. I have to be in a place where I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think not caring And carrying a belief system of not caring is the most harmful thing as a human being that I could ever do.
Yeah. And did people get hurt?
Oh, yeah. Daily. Unfortunately, daily. Where I'm at in my life and have been for so long, the regret that I have about the road that I have traveled is not that I have traveled the road and been where I've been and seen what I've seen and experienced what I've experienced, including prison. The regret that I have is that other people had to get hurt in order for me to travel that path.
That is exactly how I feel about my journey. That is exactly how I feel about it. What was your rock bottom?
My rock bottom was sitting in the hole, the SHU. A SHU is an acronym, 3-letter acronym, SHU, Security Housing Unit. In 1999 and 2000, me and one of my associates had attempted to kill another prisoner. We ran into his cell and stabbed him multiple times and were assessed SHU terms for that. And while I was sitting in the SHU, I had been, because I'd been to the hole a few times by now, I'd been classified as what they refer to as standalone walk alone. And what that means is I lived in a cell by myself. I went out to the yard I had no other human interaction. The only other human beings that I interacted with were the guards when they were coming to the door to open up a slot and either give me my food, mail, or put handcuffs on me to take me to the shower or to take me to the yard. And at the time, there were a couple of infamous California criminals that were, in the same general vicinity. They were on the other side of this unit, Charles Manson and Sirhan. And Charles Manson could go out to the yard with other people. He was able to go out to the yard and socialize and be around other folks. And for anybody who's familiar with that individual, he never himself committed a physical act, but he used his silver tongue to talk other individuals into doing things. And so here's a man who, in my mind, is a monster. A person who, in my mind, has Svengali type characteristics about himself and can talk people into doing things. And they're allowing him to be around other people. But I cannot be around other human beings. And so that is what I identify as rock bottom. It's not that I was in prison. It's not that I was serving life. It's not that by this time I had been in over a decade. It was that I was viewed by the system as more dangerous than somebody that I saw as a real live boogeyman. And so I told, there was plenty of time to reflect on that and begin to ask myself, some very serious questions, beginning with, how the hell did I wind up here?
Well, this is a question that I never get to ask on this show, but if it wasn't for the presence of Charles Manson in this story, do you think you'd get out?
I don't know. I really don't have the answer to that.
The SHU, solitary. Good idea, bad idea, helpful, harmful?
For me as an individual, it was helpful and necessary.
Yeah.
You can't just have people running around stabbing other people, trying to kill other people. That you got to keep people safe.
Yeah. You were originally incarcerated for attempted murder, and then this is sort of it's not sort of, a second attempted murder. Is that true? Was that the goal?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's going through your head at that point, if you know, if anything?
The episode that sent me to the SHU, what was going through my head was, again, the old narrative of being a protector. I could trace it back to the narrative beginning with my sister. So, I mentioned it was with another of my associates, and I was serving life. So I was never going home. He had a few years. He had the opportunity to go home and, make something of himself and do something with his life. And the events that led up to this assault had absolutely nothing to do with me. I was somewhere else in the prison, in my cell, minding my own business. He had gotten into an altercation with this individual, and he was young and hot-headed at the time, and he was always getting into physical altercations with people. And something that I told him was, the next time you get into it with somebody, there won't be any fist fighting. You're going to pick up some iron and you're going to stab him.
Mm.
And in my mind, it was a twofold piece. Number one, it was to let him know and communicate the seriousness of where we are. You running around engaging in all of this bullshit, putting everybody else in jeopardy. Hopefully this will be the motivation for you to think about what you have going on and what could be a consequence of your actions, hoping that he won't do it anymore and he'll go somewhere and he'll sit down and chill. That was a piece. And then another piece was pushing the line of discipline. And so when he got into it again and he came to us with what was going on, I said, well, okay, if this is something that has to be done, you know what you got to do. And I'll go with you to make certain that you're safe and you're able to do it. And if we get caught, I'll ride the beef. I'll say it was all me, cut you loose. I'm already doing life. There's nothing else they can do to me. But if they catch you for what we going to do, you going to have life. So I'll just have them put it on top of what I'm already doing and say you had nothing to do with it. So that was my thinking at the time. It wasn't like I was mad at this dude. I didn't even know the dude.
For many people, myself included, the narrative that we often hear now is on the other side of this equation. It's 3 strikes, you're out, mandatory minimums, people serving life sentences and never getting out for minor nonviolent offenses. And then here we have you, attempted murder, another attempted murder in prison, so bad behavior more than a decade in. I think I would have been surprised to find out that there were any people with that profile who ever got out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get out?
So they have this thing called Board of Parole Hearings. And the Board of Parole Hearings is a body that is appointed by the governor of California. I think now there's like 15 of them. They have what they call commissioners and they have deputy commissioners. And they're ultimately confirmed by the California legislature. They're usually retired law enforcement. A lot of them are former sheriffs, chiefs of police, wardens, judges, prosecutors. Every now and again, you'll have a defense attorney. So you have folks like that are on this panel. And you go before them if you have life with the possibility of parole after a certain time period, and they review your life. You go over your life from the time you stepped out of your mother's womb to the moment you walked in that door and sat down for this hearing.
And they're empowered to take into account the entire arc of your story.
Everything.
Wow.
And so they make the determination. It is on them. And there's, certain legal parameters and guidelines and things like that. And they pretty much make the determination on whether or not you are what they call suitable for parole. And if they find you suitable for parole, then they determine how much actual time you will do based on the offenses you have committed. So that's how the process works. I went before the Board of Parole hearings 3 times prior to being released. And that was a long way for me to get to. You asked how I got out. What they are looking for is individuals being able to articulate what they call insight, remorse, and the ability to take responsibility for what it is they have done and to articulate how they will not relapse into that same sort of behavior if and when released back into society. So it's a very detailed process. The first time I went to board, the hearing was a total of 8 hours.
Is that a new process? It can't be that new. You've been doing it for some time, yeah.
No, sir, it is not. That goes back to the late 60s and early 70s.
Wow. Is it common across states?
I can speak for California. Again, California, they have 2 levels of life sentences. They have life with the possibility of parole, and they have life without the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
If you have life without the possibility of parole, that's natural life. You are dying in prison. If you have life with the possibility of parole, there is a certain minimum number of years attached to that. So you're going to do a minimum of X number of years or until you die. So if you never demonstrate suitability, you never get out.
Yeah. Okay. So you show up for your first, your second, your third. I'm sure that at any of those points, if you handed over your report card and said, hey, had some tough stuff as a kid, but I just stabbed a guy 30 times, let me out, they're not going to say, sounds good. So what did you add to that list of experiences? What shifted for you after that experience in the SHU, if that's when it did shift, that made a compelling case to this board?
The first hearing I went to, I wasn't ready. First hearing I went to was in 2008. That was the first time I was eligible for parole. I went to prison in 1990. The first time I was eligible was in 2008. By the time I, was eventually paroled in 2014, I had been doing work on myself as an individual through a lot of different modalities, and I had a more firm grasp on myself. I had a better relationship with who I was and an understanding of what got us to the place. And when I say us, I'm talking about myself and the board commissioners, because the only reason we were sitting in the room having a discussion was based on things that I had done, things that I was responsible for, and figuring out and finding out what it was in me that allowed me to be able to normalize and rationalize that sort of behavior.
And I guess the question is, and again, inside looking out, it all makes sense. Outside looking in, it doesn't make sense. So help us understand the inside out. Pre-prison, you're a free person. And so even though life is exceedingly difficult and constrained, and you've made a set of choices that have deepened that reality, there are options.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem that once you're in and you have life, there are no options. And as you said, the apathy. It would seem that the conditions once you're in prison for apathy are much more logical and stronger, and yet you choose not apathy. Why?
Well, again, for me, it goes to the rock bottom episode that I talked about in the SHU. And then once I was released from the SHU, making it to New Folsom Prison and beginning to take stock in my life and how I got where I was in life, both physically, emotionally, and mentally, and taking stock in the opportunities that I have, because, I can sit here and I can tell the story and folks can hear about, some of the traumatic things that occurred. And I had both parents in the household growing up. Both of my parents are still alive. I had the opportunity to travel the world as a young person. Always had a roof over my head, always had food in the cupboards, never worried about, where my next meal was coming from, was a straight A student. On the flip side, I had all of these things going for myself as well. And so when I began to take stock and look at the trajectory of my life and the path that I chose, opposed to the path that I rejected, I had to start asking myself, why did I choose this? Where did the motivation for these choices come from? This didn't just happen. This didn't just appear from someplace. I didn't just wake up one day and I'm Vegas. I didn't just wake up one day and reject home training and go out into the gutter and pick up the game. That wasn't something that I was born into. That was something that I chose. Why did I choose this? What was the motivation? What inside of me was so wounded, was so broken, was in such need of something that I wind up here because I am responsible for this? Getting to a place where it was about my responsibility and not because I got caught because somebody snitched or I did this because this fool was disrespect. Stripping away all of that bullshit and getting down to what is my place in this? What is my responsibility? What is my ownership over my life? Because that's who it boils down to.
And now a quick break from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show.
Leadership is about making tough calls under pressure. The key is knowing who to trust. When Aspen faced short-term rental and zoning challenges, I turned to Skyrun Vacation Rentals in Aspen. They gave it to me straight and trusted me to do what was best for our community. With their help, we crafted balanced regulations that strengthened our economy, supported locals, and preserved our character. If you need expert guidance in a time of STR or zoning challenge, give them a call. And to experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, don't take it from me, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes. Feel free to pass it along.
The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. In my work at the Civic Courage Lab as a coach, when we are working on things, we dispel with the myth of if then. This happened, and so this is the outcome. Effectively, this happened to me. Mm-hmm. To identifying the goal of who we want to be, mm-hmm. and then orchestrating our lives around getting there and learning in the process. So if the initial goal of Vegas was to not get hurt and to have respect or power, my words, not yours, what was the new goal that you were acting to orient your behavior around in this new phase of self-understanding?
The new goal was freedom. And when I say freedom, I'm not talking about physical freedom, because I was certain that I would never get out of prison. The new goal was from the internal prison.
Yeah.
Not the external prison. The external prison, I could do that all day long. The new goal was internal prison. The prisons that I created within myself, because the external prison, the physical prison, pales in comparison to the prisons that I can create for myself.
You said something really interesting. So I think many people are familiar with ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, as being a leading indicator correlated to a number of tragic life outcomes, including violence, et cetera. I just finished reading a book called The Violence Project. It's old. It's about the psychology of mass shooters. Fantastic book, highly recommended. They talk about something quite interesting, which I hadn't heard before, and I think it's what you're describing. You have your ACE score, right? So my ACE score is relatively high as well, and I've had trouble with addiction, et cetera. But they talk about the scale, and on the other side of the ACE score are your pro-social inputs, the parents in the home, these moderating forces that support one in avoiding the worst outcomes, even with high ACE scores. I'm wondering if that tracks with your experience. And then I'm also wondering now, as the CEO or director of Inside Circle, working with folks doing their rehabilitation work, for folks that have really high ACE scores but don't have any of those pro-social advantages, are you still seeing those folks turn their lives around?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I am somebody that is, and there are, quite a few individuals sprinkled in that have a background similar to mine. And we're kind of unicorns in this life. as far as the early advantages and access, to different services and opportunities in life. And there are a lot of folks that are born into just abject poverty and just nightmarish hellholes. And you look at it objectively, it's no wonder that they wind up either dead or in prison.
Yeah.
And folks who participate in what we do in the modality of healing work that we do, to date, we have been doing this since 1997. And individuals who participate in the work that we do, they just don't return to prison. And many of them are lifelong criminals. Many of them are gang members. Hell, at 19, I was tried by the career criminal unit. So that tells you what I had been doing in the community all throughout my teenage years. By the time I was 19, the career criminal unit prosecuted my case, and folks just don't go back.
So this is a question I wanted to ask you. You're bringing it up for a broader group, but I'll ask it personally, which is like, will you ever go back to prison? And if you won't, why not?
Well, I can't say I won't go back to prison because I go back to prison all the time. I'm always in there working.
Touche. Will you ever be forcibly escorted back to prison? And if you wouldn't, which is my assumption, why not? Like, what are the constellation of reasons or support, or what makes you feel sure about that?
Well, I won't be escorted back as a resident because the things that would have me incarcerated are so far off the radar of any activity. Those are not things that are normalized in my sphere of life today. And that is not a lifestyle that I choose for myself. Every one of the exercises that I utilize in my life daily is when I wake up, I ask myself, who do I want to be today? Because who I was yesterday, that shit's in the rearview mirror. Because if I go apeshit crazy and do something today, they are going to forget everything that I did yesterday. And the focus will be on what he did today. And then they'll hearken all the way back to the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. And that will be who I am.
Do you ask that like literally in bed, first thing when your eyes open? When do you ask it? How do you ask it?
It's a conscious thing that I'm always asking when I wake up. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And before I go to bed at night, I replay that day. What could I have done differently today? Did I show up today the best way that I wanted to? Is there something that I need to go back and clean up? Is there a makeup to be had? Is there a way in which I showed up that had a negative impact? And what was that impact on myself or others? And how can I clean that up?
Is that always a mental process? Is it ever written or captured anywhere?
It's a mental process. It's built in. It's a part of, my robot.
And at the end of the day, so you're doing your review, if you identify some area of potential improvement, what, if anything, do you do the next day or the next week to have accountability on following through?
I go right at it and address it. If it's something with another individual, it gets cleaned up, so long as it doesn't do more harm. Because I have to take into account what it is that I'm doing, and especially if it's with another human being. Just because I want something, just because I'm looking for something, doesn't mean that Skippy wants that or Skippy is open to that. If I brought some harm to Skippy and I'm going through my mental gymnastics at night and I identify it, if bringing that back up and making that an issue and bringing it back up to the surface can potentially cause harm to Skippy, I got to be aware and conscious of that as well.
Is the standard for bringing it up to me, let's make me the recipient of this, is it simply the possibility of harm that keeps you from sharing? Do you ask for my permission? How do you approach that?
I have to ask for your permission.
Yeah.
I'm not smart enough to know what you want or what works for you without asking you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll frame it this way. What other daily practices keep you living the life that you want to live?
Being in relationship with my family. I don't get to do that if I'm in prison, in physical prison. And I don't get to do it if I'm in a prison that I create for myself, a mental or emotional prison either. Because if I'm in those places, then I'm disconnected. And if I'm disconnected, then I'm not in relationship, not true, authentic relationship.
In my work, we work along the 6 pillars of empowered leadership with the recognition that they are all interconnected and support one another. Think of the 6 legs of the stool of your highest potential in service, or your arete. They don't all have to be exactly even, but if you get too out of balance, you fall off. And the goal is to continually have them go higher and higher. And with that, your potential and your impact do as well. So it's mental health, emotional health, physical health, social health, which would include the family, financial health, and spiritual health. Are there other ways that you daily care for those other elements of Eldra so that you can be of highest service to those you serve?
Yeah, I'm always sitting in circle. I sit in circle multiple times a week. In the circle of individuals I know, there aren't many people who sit in circle more than I do. There are several people who sit in circle as much as I do, but there aren't many who sit in circle more than I do.
Hmm.
I'll be working on myself till, I'm no longer breathing. So I am committed to my own interpersonal work because there's no way I can do the work that I can do, not really and effectively, if I'm not doing my own work.
Amen, brother.
Because in the work that I do, it's really about modeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about me doing something for somebody else or coaching somebody into doing something else. It's about supporting other folks in finding their own medicine and their own capacity to do for self.
That's right.
And if I'm not doing that myself, then I have no way to tap into that or support and see the capability and the capacity in another human being.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I experience this regularly as a coach, leader of leaders. Like, whatever I am investing in myself, I see that direct pour over into supporting clients every day. And if I am not doing my work, then I am not showing up for my clients. I'm leaving them at a deficit. I very much understand that. This is a great time to say, like, what is Circle? What are the characteristics of Circle? How does it function? Why does it work? If I were to walk into a room and there were people seated in a circle orientation, how would I know if they were practicing circle or not?
Well, you would know that they were practicing circle or not if you walked in the room and everybody stops talking and looks at you like you're an alien with 19 heads.
Okay.
Because if you just walked in the room and you're not a part of that circle, then you shouldn't be there. And one of the main pillars of those containers is anonymity. And so there are no looky-loos, there are no, visitors or anything like that. There are processes to bring folks in. But what a circle looks like in its rawest and truest and most simplest form is people sitting around telling the truth about where they hurt and trying to get to a place where maybe it just hurts a little bit less the next time I talk about it. Not attempting to fix it, not attempting to make it go away. Nobody's trying to solve anything for anybody or be some shaman who's healing someone. But folks just sitting around and having the opportunity in a space that feels safe to tell the truth about, and I'm going to say this, excuse my French, where they're fucked up.
Yeah.
Because people don't get the opportunity to talk about that. People don't get the opportunity to look at that due to the fear of being judged. And so if you were to be in a space where folks were engaged in circle in the vein in which we engage with it in, you would know it because there would be magic happening.
Is Circle always men only?
No, I'm just coming off a weekend in Santa Monica. We do outside circles 3 to 4 times a year. And it's, come one, come all.
That's awesome. Are people required to share, or can you just be in silence the whole time?
Everyone has the right to pass. And if you're coming for a reason.
Yeah.
It's likened to the hero's journey. There's a lot of mythology in, people coming together and people getting together and building containers. There's a call, and then there's an answer to that call. And then there's a descent. And then there is an ordeal, and there's an ascent, and then there's a welcoming back. So all of those things are a part of the circle process. And for somebody to be sitting in circle, they've heard a call and they've made a choice to answer the call. So very rarely do people, show up in circle and they just sit there and don't say anything.
So I show up in circle and my share is, hey, though I've been clean for 18 months, I ended up using last weekend. I made some irresponsible sexual decisions. I'm feeling ashamed and embarrassed. I'm feeling the desire to use again. I know it's not an NA circle, but that's just my share because it's something that I've said in a circle before, different version of a circle. How do the other circle participants respond or not to me? Are there rules about how they engage?
There are always facilitators in these circles. And the reality is that everyone in circle is a facilitator. Everyone in circle has the capacity to facilitate. People are just at varying levels of comfort with their ability to facilitate. So, if Skippy were to check in with that and you were asked, is this something that you want to look at? Assuming you said yes, I might ask, okay, and so how's that serving you? I hear you say that, you've had X amount of time of sobriety, and last weekend, you made a choice to do this and that led to this. What were the effects of that in your life? And so it would go off into, supporting you in walking through looking at your life, your actions, your decisions, and your impact on yourself and others. And does that work for you? And if that works for you, you're fine. There's no judgment because you're the one who has to live with that. You get to have a mirror held up to you and be supported in looking at what does and does not work for you. If it does not work for you, then you can get some support around accessing the answers within yourself around what does work for you and how you can go about developing strategies to cement that in your being and begin to apply that.
So first there's a sharing that is encouraged to be fully honest in a confidential container. There is then an offer for support. So there's a permission structure. I may just want to say it. I might not want any support. If I do ask for support, the first stage is simply clarifying questions. And then talk to me about this third phase. Do people share advice, experience? Like, how are they then helping me find a different path?
Oh, there's no advice. We don't give advice.
Okay.
We don't do no
Beautiful.
advice given in circle because I'm still trying to figure my own life out. I'm not wise enough to know what you need in your life.
Beautiful.
That piece is around what do you have available to you? What exists within you? Because the answer resides in you. And sometimes I can be so closed off and consumed with other things that my internal waters are muddy. So there's support around clearing those waters so that I can see more clearly the answers that reside within me. So Skippy is going to have support around clearing the muddy waters within himself so that he can access the tools and the medicine within him, because what works for Eldra may not work for Skippy. So me sharing with you about what works for me and what I do and all of those sorts of things is a bunch of hot air, because Skippy lives in a very different world and a very different environment with very different support structures or not, and has access to very different resources. And so only you know what works for you.
Yeah. Are there time limits on shares or questions, or is it just on a as needed basis?
As needed basis. There's no time limit on life.
Yes. And then once I'm clear as the recipient, or I believe I'm clear, is there any goal setting, follow-up accountability, or that person goes and does their thing, and if they bring it back, they bring it back?
If you are open to and you feel like you need an accountability partner or you want to bring this back, you may be asked, well, how will you know that you're succeeding in what it is that you said you will do? And how can we support you in that? Are you going to check in? Would you like an accountability partner? Is there someone here that you trust who can walk this path with you? So there are many things that can come up that might be offered for an individual that says they don't know how to quote unquote work this. Okay, well, here are some potential tools that, could be available to you. Do any of these line up with you? Are you tracking with any of these? Do any of these feel good to you?
Yeah. Obviously, you are an example of circle in action and efficacy. Is there like one other impactful story of someone else who's gone through Circle that you might share just for the audience to kind of get a secondary human touch as to the impact of the work?
Sure. And I've gotten permission from an individual to kind of share, some skeletons of his experience. And I've done so in other spaces. There's an individual that is a part of a group we were working with in another part of the country. And there were folks that were identified as gang members. And, there was an individual who liked to get loaded, pop pills and different things like that. And his homeboys, used to get down on him about that. That was something that he was, judged around. And they were doing it out of love and minus the tools to, really do it from a place of compassion. And, we were able to sit in circle with these individuals. And one of the things that an experience that he shared was, being a very young child, and witnessing his father strangle his stepmother at the dinner table to death, and then hang her body in a closet, and then go upstairs and strangle her parents to death, the stepmother's parents to death. And while he was upstairs doing that, his younger sister opened up the door, and the body of the dead stepmother fell over on his younger sister. And then, the father took the kids and they left and went to another state. And there was, a whole bunch of other stuff that, went into play. And as you might imagine, there was a lot that young man was self-medicating himself running from and not wanting to deal with, that was in there. And he was just reliving it over and over and over and over again. And he was never able to articulate that until he had the opportunity to sit in circle and feel the support of circle. And there were individuals who were in that, his cousin, blood cousin, was in that space and didn't know about this. And so that helped not only him, but it was cathartic for his brethren to be able to see him in a different light and understand a bit more about his struggles and what it was that he was going through, which leveled up their ability to tap into compassion and empathy for what he was going through and what he was experiencing. But it also empowered him to recognize where he was at in his life and begin to want to reclaim parts of himself that he had been distant from for so long and begin to make changes in his life. Those are the sorts of things that I get the opportunity, that I'm blessed to be able to experience in circle.
Thank you for sharing that. With the totality of your lived experience, your lived learnings, but also this mountain of learnings you've had through running, facilitating, and sitting in circles with folks, I imagine many thousands or tens of thousands at this point. And I ask this question not as a request for judgment of any person, because we're all just coming into our decisions with the best information that we have. So assuming positive intent by the actors, but knowing what you know about human psychology and crime and rehabilitation, what do you think the single biggest failure in understanding of our political leadership today is?
That we're all people. My experience is, and I'm very familiar with apathy, there's a level of apathy in some of our systemic structures around that reality. We are all human beings. Everyone is a human being. And everyone, even though, I'm in my 50s now and I look like I look, I've still got a little boy in me. Skippy looks like he looks, and he's got a little boy in him. And we all have little children in us, and all of those little children have had experiences that have shaped and molded who we are. And a lot of our structures, I experience an apathy around the human condition and the importance of understanding that everyone has been through something. And until I have the blessing of that being shared with me, there's no room to judge another human being.
If you had a magic wand and you could create any policy, any approach to, it could be education, it could be any you can control societal variables with the goal of reducing prison populations by 80%. So the prison themselves aren't changing, but there's just 80% less people going into them. What would you change to arrive at that result?
One of the core curriculums beginning in preschool would be emotional literacy. For me, that's more important than the old standards of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Emotional literacy, and folks sitting around in a circle and checking in. How do you feel? And giving human beings the opportunity to learn how to tap into what they feel and be able to be with it in the moment and articulate it to others. That's the number one thing.
Wow. And you think that alone could be that powerful?
I know it could be. I've watched stone cold killers be able to do just that and decide not to kill anymore.
Yeah. Do you believe evil is real?
Certainly. I believe that evil is real because when you talk about evil or you talk about good, all you're talking about is intention. At the core, at the base, is intention. And there are some intentions that exist in this world that are truly altruistic and come from a place of light. And there are intentions in this world that are, quote unquote, evil and come from a very dark place.
Do you believe that those evil intentions are ever predetermined or guaranteed, or do you think that they are always or mostly the result of circumstance and evil done to that individual?
I don't think that they just exist and just are. I think that they're always a result of something, whether that something is real or the perception of how it was presented or my perception of what was done can make it evil.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are folks who are irredeemable or who can't be rehabilitated?
I believe that there are some people like that.
Yeah.
I believe that there are some people who have had experiences or whatever, be it genetic or whatever. I think that there are some people that have had some things that exist in their life that by the time they reach a certain point, they're just gone.
Yeah, it's too late. So knowing that a large number of folks, yourself included, who have had challenging situations and have done harmful things, hurtful things, are in fact able to not only reverse that, but become like beautiful, generative members of society. And that there are also folks who that might never be possible for. And as you said, going into the shoe was helpful for you, but also could be harmful for someone else. If you were put in charge of a prison tomorrow, how would you run it? What would be the core approaches, beliefs, or practices within its walls, and why?
Well, it goes back to what I said about starting in preschool. If I was in charge of the penal system, one of the very first things, if not the very first thing that would be done upon receiving a resident, an inmate, a convict, whatever language you choose to call them, coming into the institution, would be to begin to develop a transformational plan, not a rehabilitative plan, a transformational plan. We use that word rehabilitate. That is the word that most people are very familiar with. And if we're talking about rehabilitating someone, we are making a very arrogant assumption that they have come from a place of habilitation, that they have come from a place of being a part of the system and being accepted in the system and having all of the advantages of the resources and being accepted. So if I'm talking about somebody who's never been habilitated and we're talking about rehabilitation, they're already set up for failure because we're talking about supporting them in assimilating into a situation and a system that they have never been a part of. That goes back to the apathy that I spoke about within the system, the arrogance and the disconnect from the fact that we are all human beings. And if we're all human beings, I have to be open to the fact that we all have our own experience. And in order for me to make a connection, I have to be open to learning about what that experience is. So the difference for me there in transformation is
Mm.
creating a space for an individual to transform their life, to transform themselves, to engage in alchemy and create something new out of something.
Beautiful. The last thing that I want to touch in, and then I want to open the floor to anything that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on, is this very commonly, maybe even overused term of toxic masculinity. It has become a buzzword, but it's a buzzword that's very much associated with you and your work. So first, can you just describe what that means to you as you understand it?
Certainly. So, like you say, it is a buzzword, and it is something that is become kind of a hot topic. Let me preface it by saying this. Toxic masculinity are any traits of masculinity that can be harmful.
Hmm.
That is not saying that masculinity in itself is toxic. There can be aspects of masculinity that can be toxic, just like there can be aspects of femininity that can be toxic. Anything can be toxic. Hell, a person can drink too much water
You can die.
and go into
Yeah,
toxic
yeah.
shock.
Yeah. Just about everything has an LD50.
Everything. And so there are aspects of I'll speak from the I perspective. There are aspects of my masculinity that can be toxic if I am not aware. I can be blind to and unconscious to how I show up in my masculinity that can have a negative impact on other people,
Mm.
that can have a negative impact on other folks. And sometimes that can be intentional, and sometimes it can be unintentional.
And so toxicity in that sense is the harming of something else, some other organism outside of the self. And that could really be applied to anything, femininity, masculinity, any number of things. It's just that this is what's in the common parlance. So you think of it like very directionally as just there are traits that we agree are masculine. And when they are overextended or overemphasized to the point where they cause harm to others, that's basically what we're talking about.
Most certainly. I think most folks are familiar with the practices of hazing.
Sure.
To get into social clubs, fraternities, sororities. Those are toxic aspects of masculinity as well as femininity. Taking things to the nth degree in order to whatever the whole mindset and all of those things are behind it. There are some toxic, aspects there where harm is caused. And it's about, toughening somebody up or making certain that somebody is worthy of being a part of all of those sorts of things. Those are things that I think we all are in agreement can bring harm and have brought harm to other human beings.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced resistance to the term? Have you ever heard toxic masculinity and felt resistance or anger or wanted to kind of fight back against that term?
Not myself, not the term, but the way in which some people can weaponize it. When anything is weaponized, then I can feel, resistance to it.
Mm-hmm. What do you do with that resistance in yourself? Or if it's easier to answer the question, certainly there are a lot of folks who have resistance to the term toxic masculinity. I've felt that before. How do you meet that resistance?
If I'm feeling some resistance, where is that resistance in me?
Yeah.
Is what I'm hearing touching something that's true in me? So I want to check within my internal landscape and see if that is the case. And if it is, then that's something for me to address. And then if it's not, then what is it about this situation or the way that it's being presented or the person or people who are presenting it that I have an issue with?
Yeah. So you said something earlier when I was going back to 92 and meeting Vegas out in the street. You said I would have been smart to run. I would have potentially been in harm's way. Unless you tell me otherwise, Vegas was someone who was acting from a place of toxicity, who was hurting others to protect his own ego, whether he knew that or not. And then let's just say for the ease, of course, this is a spectrum and not two poles, but then there are folks who are acting from transformation or from awareness, right? So this is sort of the good versus evil in their intentions. For folks who are out here who are not immersed in gang culture, who are not in particularly dire situations, but are walking through the normal world, trying to live a life in a world that is always in tug and pull. How have you learned to identify, if you have, where people are coming from? Are they coming from toxicity, a desire to hurt, from apathy, or are they coming from a good intention of some kind? And how do you choose to engage, interact, or not interact with folks based on that understanding?
For starters, I don't know for certain where anybody is coming from unless they say so.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm uncertain and if it's something I wish to engage in, then I'll ask, hey, what did you mean by this?
Mm.
This is the story that I'm making up, or this is how I received it. Is this how you meant it?
Mm.
Because in my mind, what it just experienced is you giving me a great big fuck you. Is that what you meant? And so now there's an opportunity for them to say, yes, that's what I meant. So now we have an understanding. Or for them to say, no, not at all. That's not what I meant. What I was intending to communicate was, ABC 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
So it's really just about communicating.
Mm. Yeah, all problems are interpersonal problems. And you can only take accountability for your own action, get clear, and act as such. Beautiful. Eldra, this has been a very rich conversation. I feel like I have learned a lot. I'm so grateful for you to bring me and the audience into your experience. And I have no doubt that many people will be able to find shifts in themselves as a result. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you are just kind of burning to share or ask or discuss?
Something I always like to share is connect with yourself, love yourself, whatever that looks like for you. Because if I don't know myself and I don't love myself, then I can't model and demonstrate to others how to treat me and how to love me.
Yeah.
And if I'm not doing that, then I'm always going to find myself, potentially in situations that are less than prime for me and everybody else around me. That's one thing that I hope folks will do for themselves. And another thing, as an executive director of an organization, I always have to give a plug.
Absolutely.
We have a podcast as well, the Inside Circle podcast. Come check it out. We actually interviewed you, Skippy, for that podcast. And, check out our website, insidecircle.org, and come see what we're about. And if you think there's something there for you, attend an event.
I just want to underline all of that and then highlight it and underline it some more, because from the moment I've gotten to know Eldra and the work that he does, it is beautiful. It is making a difference. And if you want to be, as I know you do, part of the solution, part of the transformation, then working with them is a guaranteed way to move in that direction. And their work is changing lives every day. Beautiful. So, any social, I know you did the website, social media accounts, anything that you would want people to follow?
Yes, we are on Instagram. We are on X. We are on Facebook. The best place to find us is at insidecircle.org. And I mentioned earlier in this episode, we just came off of a weekend in Santa Monica. Our next Outside Circle event will be held in San Francisco, October 10th through the 12th. And we'd love anybody who has not experienced this work, who thinks they might have something to learn or something to investigate with other like-minded and kindred spirits, come on out to San Francisco and check us out.
Such an honor and pleasure to have you here, brother. You really are a walking example of so many of the things that I have come to believe about humanity and the power to heal and up-level and transform. So I want to just close with the same question that we have for every guest, which is our audience are not passive observers. They are the people in the arena. They're the people making decisions about how we run prisons or how we educate our children. So if you could leave them with just one thing, a quote, a book, a practice, anything at all, but just one thing that would best resource them to be a vector for, I'll use your word, transforming our politics and our humanity, what would it be?
See yourself in other people. Anytime you run across somebody, anytime I run across somebody that really rubs up against something in me and I have a visceral reaction, what is it about myself that I am seeing that it's still have an unresolved relationship with. So begin to see yourself in others, especially those that it's not easy to do so with.
Amen, brother. As we say, change starts with the human in the mirror. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to put what you've heard here today into practice, sign up for our newsletter, The Leader's Handbook, where each month you'll receive just one email with a curated selection of the most useful tools and practices discussed on this podcast today and over the course of the last month, delivered in simple how-to worksheets, videos, and audio guides, so you and your teams can try and test these out in your own life and see what best serves you. And lastly, if you want to be a vector for healing our politics, if you want to do your part, take out your phone right now and share this podcast with 5 colleagues you care about. Send a simple text, drop a line, and leave the ball in their court. Because the truth is, the more those around you do their work, the better it will show up in your life, in your community, and in your world. Have a beautiful day.
As leaders, we all face contentious situations. As an Aspen City Councilman, I navigated some of the most contentious STR and land use conversations in a generation. And while most were engaged in a food fight, profit versus community, Skyrun Vacation Rentals, a company built on community-first values for 20 years that I know personally, helped me find a solution that created positive outcomes for everyone. If you want responsible vacation rentals in your community to strengthen the local economy, Skyrun is the vacation rental company for you. To experience their commitment to care and community up close, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay at one of their locations, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes below. Feel free to share it. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.